So this morning I'm going to be listening to a chamber opera by Víctor Rasgado. It's a one-act opera titled Anacleto Morones, and it was composed in 1991. The libretto is based on a short story of the same title by Juan Rulfo. Singers required. There are 4 lead roles: Lucas Lucitero, tenor; Pancha Fragoso, contralto; Nieves Garcia, mezzo-soprano; and then Anacleto Morones, baritone. There are also 4 minor roles, all of which are soloists in a larger female chorus. So, and these, the soloists that you would need are a soprano, a mezzo-soprano, a first alto, and a second alto. So they could act as section leaders, basically. This piece calls for a female chorus of 10 to 18 singers. So at its minimum, there should be 3 sopranos, 2 mezzo-sopranos, 3 first altos, and 2 second altos. If you want to go with a bigger production, you could have 5 sopranos, 4 mezzo-sopranos, 5 first altos, 4 second altos. The instrumentation for the orchestra is 1-1-1-1, 1-1-1-1, 2 percussions, 1-1-1-1. And there's one scene in the piece that requires playback of magnetic tape, which is fixed media. The setup for the orchestra: in the front row near the director should be the 2 violins, viola, clarinet, oboe, flute, and then behind them the bass, cello, and bassoon. Then the brass behind that, and then the 2 percussionists. The percussion setups are as follows. This is what the first percussion setup should look like. You have to their right tam-tam next to a gong, then a vibraphone with cowbells on a stand above it, and then a bunch of smaller percussions. We have suspended cymbals, guiro, metal chimes, rototoms, 4 of them, glass chimes, wood blocks, and military drum. So you can see the chimes are set up behind the drums, and on the complete opposite side of the tam-tam are the wood blocks. The second percussion has a even bigger setup. So they need, they basically have a bass drum behind them, and next to that, latigo. But next, also on the other side of the bass drum, they have a marimba with wood blocks in front of it, and bongos and congas with 4 cowbells in front of them, a triangle, 2 timbales with I guess even more cowbells in front of it, and then another gong and tubular bells. So lots of percussion. It is a 2-hour piece. A little bit about the plot here. Anacleto Morones is being regarded as a saint by a group of nuns, or basically a group of women from a small parish, and they congregate to go find him, and he's dead. They meet at his estate, Lucas Lucitero, and they've traveled from this distant town of Amula just to come find Anacleto Morones' child, make them a saint. And the dark undertone is that Lucas has murdered Anacleto. And these women sort of like trap him. He's unable to throw them out of his house. So because they've traveled so far, he just invites them to drink some water and rest. Some of the women leave. Some of the women are more devoted to this cause. One of them being Pancha Fregoso. And throughout the night, Lucas refuses to admit that Anacleto was any kind of holy person. Basically, it's a bit sardonic, and the undertone is that Anacleto Morones has slept with all these women, and the reason why they're worshiping him is because he's given them so much pleasures in life. But there's nothing holy about him or his son. His son just has murdered him, basically. So yeah, that's the plot, basically. And there's definitely a lot of like comedy and tragedy, and I think if you look into the story itself, it probably has some political connotations. There's a bunch of stuff on how to pronounce the text, and he has many symbols for, like, example, transitioning between vowels, or making the voice more sonorous or nasal. And then he has a bunch of IPA stuff here, which is really useful for singers, just knowing for certain how to pronounce everything the way the composer wants. I think is a big deal. And I'm sure in the context of the piece it'll make sense. Víctor Rasgado died in 2023, very recently, and was born in 1959. And he's a Mexican composer with international success. He studied at the National School of Music, at the Tiamatiname Research Center and Musical Studies, Center for Research and Musical Studies in Mexico. He also studied history at the Metropolitan Autonomous University. He continued his studies with Franco Donatoni at the Giuseppe Verdi Conservatory of Milan, and he founded, alongside Juan Trigos, the Sones Contemporaneos Ensemble, which specialized in the performance of contemporary Mexican performers. His opera Anacleto Morones is his most famous work, and it received the Orpheus Prize for chamber operas. And his music is quite extensive, mostly chamber music. And he spent most of his life living in and around Mexico City. Okay, hopefully that's enough of an introduction for you. I don't think I'm going to read the short story this morning, but the opera is 2 hours long. It's all handwritten, this score. And it's about 200 pages of music. If you want the recording that I'm listening to, it's in the video description. Okay, so yeah, I really had a lot of fun revisiting this. I think I've only listened to it once before. A couple things before I start giving my opinions. I lied. It's only about an hour and a half long, and the score is not 200 pages, it's more like 360 pages, because I had the PDF split up here. It really does feel like a dialogue between the tenor, soloist, and the female chorus for a lot of the piece. So there's a lot of really interesting choir writing in combination with different families of the orchestra. Sometimes the choir is completely exposed. There's a lot of, like, in the first half of the piece, there's a lot of full chorus stuff where all 10 parts are independent, and it's very like textural, and it was yeah, just a lot of cool use of female voice on stage. It's a fantastic presence to have so many female singers on stage, and the sound of it is just amazing. Just this really loud female chorus versus one tenor voice. You really hear like the like it's an inherently funny scenario. There's a certain comedic value in how much louder the women sound, and how it's apparent how easily they could overpower this man, but they're so conservative and provincial, I guess, that they just most of them just end up leaving. And there's he's sort of just playing with them the entire time. The use of tape was interesting. It was sort of like in this production, there's a very long portion of the piece for solo clarinet and tape, and in this production they used that time to show Lucas murdering Anacleto on stage, and the other part where the tape comes in is like also very dark lighting, might have something to do with the murder, or personally I found those parts to be the least successful. They seem to like add drama to the story that was already there, and the electronic sounds were a little bit dated to my ears. There was a lot of like orchestral sounds or percussion sounds that were either synthesized or heavily manipulated by electronics, and then in this case like re-recorded from the hall. Some of my favorite moments were towards the end. There's a duet between Lucas and Pancha with a brass accompaniment, like just the 4 brass instruments, and it's really fantastic and powerful, and it illustrates the sort of parodic nature of the piece, because it's played straight like a love duet, but it's like the worst couple you could imagine. This guy's a murderer, and they should have nothing but contempt for one another, and probably do. And yeah, it was just really fun. And another moment I really liked was towards the middle of the piece. There's a choir solo called like In Unico or something. Actually, let me just point out what I'm talking about here. Eris El Unico, scene 9, I think, was one of my favorite parts, and then this 12th scene was also really interesting, I thought. So yeah, there's no shortage of sopranos in the opera world, and it's a highly competitive field, and even at the university level, the women far outnumber the men in most vocal opera programs. So I think this piece could have a really utilitarian function, getting lots of singers to work together on a project. And I also just think that the content of the story is really unique and interesting and fun, and I think it would resonate more with contemporary audiences than a lot of opera standards. I think it's it's funny, and it's also very dark. It takes place, I think, based on Rolfo's other work. I think this should take place around the Mexican Revolution, so there's all of that like cultural baggage to it as well. As far as Rasgado's use of the ensemble, I loved the segmentation of the ensemble into different families. and giving equal importance to all families. It's not, the strings are really not the foundation of this ensemble. There's like a lot of just brass, a lot of just winds, a lot of unpitched percussion. Because this is a modernist score, it's really based around like part writing, and Rasgado, I think, is just as good at weaving a couple lines into something interesting as a dozen lines of music. It's all dense regardless. So, in that sense, it's a very flexible type of writing that can use any member of the ensemble, really. The finale is dedicated to his teacher, Franco Donatoni, so you can assume that this was written after he studied with Donatoni and with his, like, carrying his aesthetics and teachings. So, yeah, that was Anacleto Morones, our first proper opera that we've looked at, and I highly recommend you check it out and advocate for more performances of it in any capacity.